scales, pieces, maybe talk about practice, and then go home. Have you ever wondered if there's a better way to structure your lesson time? Hey, I'm Nicola from Colourful Keys and Vibrant Music Teaching, and a few years ago I made a realization about my lesson time that really revolutionized how efficient it was and how effective it was for my students, as well as how much fun I'm having. And you can do all of this without increasing the lesson time. First, let's take a little bit of a detour into how we learn. Whether you're learning about bugs or the Babylonians or Baroque music, you need to test your knowledge to make your brain work hard to make it stick. One of the simplest ways to do this is to give our brains a short forgetting time and then recall the information. This teaches our brains that we want to keep this info, that this is important to us, that we want it to stick for the long term. One way to do this is something called interleaved practice. You may have heard of this, but if you haven't, it's basically the idea of taking several things you want to practice. That can be in any location, any thing you want to learn, any subject, but we'll talk about piano practice. So you take several piano assignments and you interleave them by practicing a little bit of one, a little bit of the next one, a little bit of the next one, and then going back to the first one. You're creating layers. Rather than doing one big block, what's called blocked practice, where you practice one thing for a long time, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 3 hours, whatever the time may be, and then you practice the next thing. You're interleaving the items or layering them so that you give your brain a little chance to forget it, and then you bring it back into the front of your head to focus on it again. Now, the realization I had, I've known about interleaved practice for quite some time, but a few years ago I started thinking, hey, I'm trying to convey this to students. I'm doing it in my own practice, but it's hard to get it across to students. But I'm not practicing what I preach. We might do some examples in the lesson, but I'm not being consistent. And that's where I came up with this idea of interleaved teaching. So instead of structuring your lesson in blocks, I want you to try this idea of interleaving the lesson items. Now, this does take some getting used to in the beginning. It takes a bit of adjustment to get used to going from one thing to the next quickly enough that you can actually come up with the time to interleave the items. But if you can't do it in the lesson, whether that's 30 minutes or 45 or whatever, how do you think your student's going to do it in their practice anyway? Their practice is normally, on a daily basis, hopefully on a daily basis, shorter than what you're doing for your lesson time. Let's be realistic. Most students don't practice every day for the same amount of time as their lesson. We wish they did. So if we're expecting them to interleave within that time at home, or hoping that they will, trying to slowly train them to do that, we should be doing it in the lesson. It also, even if it doesn't train them anything for home practice, it will make your lessons with them more efficient because of exactly what we're talking about. That doesn't just count for practice. A lot of practice we do is actually in the lesson, as much as we don't want the lessons to be called practice. That's a whole other topic. But we're making the lessons more effective, more efficient, and that can only be a good thing. So here's how an interleaved lesson might look in my studio. This is just a rough idea. So it might be like 2 minutes of improvisation at the start and then 5 minutes on a new piece. And then we go to 3 minutes on practice strategies for a piece from last week called Lost Hero, okay? And then we go to a boogie piece. Then we do 3 minutes of scales. We go back to the new piece, so we're starting to interleave now. Then we go to the Lost Hero piece and the boogie piece again, and then we do some more scales. Then we do maybe a little bit more on the new piece since it's new, we want to fit in some extra on that, and then a 5-minute theory game at the end. That's an example of 30 minutes. Now my lessons are generally longer than 30 minutes, but even if yours are only 30 or only 20, you still can do this. It's about the pace at which you move. Now, it is hard to do in the beginning as a teacher. I believe we should be doing hard things because we're teachers and we need to practice what we preach, right? We need to do what it is we're expecting of students. So we need to be pushing ourselves a small amount in increments in a sustainable way, pushing ourselves to try new things. Now, if it is difficult in the beginning, here's what I want you to try. Just take one item Usually it's best to pick the thing that needs the most attention. So that could be literally the B flat major scale, or it could be like a particular section of a particular piece, a technique your student is working on. Pick one thing and then interleave that with everything else you're doing. So every time you're going to switch tasks, just put that in between. You're going to switch from one piece to another piece, ask them to play the B flat major scale. They can literally do that, or play in a certain way, like with dotted rhythms, whatever you want to do. They can do that while you're turning the pages in their book for them. So that's an easy way to start on this journey. And then once you get used to that, you'll start to find other opportunities to interleave. So this is one way to structure your lesson time. It's not the only way to do it. It's not the only way I do it, but it is one very effective way. I'd love to hear how you structure your lessons in the comments.